Hi, I'm Nicole. I did my research on evaluating the homeless services in Washington, D.C. by looking at the homeless population within America and also within Washington, D.C., and then looking at all the shelters available in the D.C. area for the homeless population. So, what is homelessness? There's many definitions of homelessness, but the one that I chose was from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And it states that a homeless person is an individual without permanent housing who may live on the streets, stay in a shelter, mission, single room occupancy facilities, abandoned building or vehicle, or in any other unstable or non-permanent situation. So even living on your friend's couch could be considered being homeless. So I'm also a public health minor as well as a nursing major, so I was looking at the public health issue that homelessness represents. And when you're homeless, you're not living in a safe environment, and that can lead to other health issues, and it can lead to depression and also substance abuse. And when you have all these issues, it's hard to get medical care sometimes, and then it's just sort of a downward spiral, creating more health issues. So Washington, D.C. specifically, it is a large public health issue because they have the highest rate of homelessness in America. So for every 10,000 people in Washington, D.C., there's 120 homeless people. And the national average is 18.3 homeless people per 10,000. So it's quite a big range. And the state that comes second to Washington, D.C. is Hawaii, and they have almost 50 homeless people per 10,000. So we more than double that. So the methods I used to find all this information was I went to the databases, and I mainly used the Homeless Research Institute, the U.S. Department of Urban Housing and Development, and the National Alliance to End Homelessness Foundation, as well as looking online at different shelters' websites to gather all my information. And I looked at data from the past 10 years to get all this. And the aspects that the data covered was chronic homelessness, individual homelessness, families that are homeless, the races and ethnicities of people that are homeless. So in total in America, during a point in time estimate, in January 2015, there was 564,708 homeless people. And that's counting people on the streets or people in emergency shelters or transitional housing shelters, which are a place you can live for up to 2 months. Some places are less, but it's usually around 2 months. And from 2007, this is a 13% decline. There used to be over 80,000 more homeless people on the streets and in shelters, but with everything that's been implemented, it's been slowly declining every year. So this is a chart explaining sort of the overall homelessness. I'm not sure if you can see all the numbers, but it has homelessness in people that are chronically homeless individuals, families, veterans. At the top, it says in 2007, there was over 650,000 homeless people. And this is from 2014. So in 2014, there was 578,000, and now there's 564,000. So there's been a decrease every year, and it's still going. In America, there's 5 states that make up more than 50% of the homeless population, which is pretty crazy, I think. California holds 21% of the nation's homeless. And so it's California, Texas, New York, Florida, and Massachusetts that represent more than 50% of all the homeless people in America. So the demographics for homeless, this is also showing the 120 homeless people per 10,000 in DC at the very top. And then this line across the middle is the national average. And so these are all the states below it. This is only 25 states, but the state at the very bottom is Mississippi, and they have the lowest rate of homelessness at 7.4 people per 10,000. So with everyone that's homeless across America, 90% of people are above age 24, and about 10% of people are between age 18 to 24, and less than 1% are below 18, so the youth. And out of all these people, 72% of homeless people are men, and out of all the people total, 54% of the homeless population are white Americans, and 36% are either African Americans or people of Black descent. And so those are the two big populations. Everyone else sort of falls into a mishmash with the other 10%. However, the total population in America, only 13% of the population is Black. So having 36% of the homeless population be Black or African American is very high. So in Washington, D.C. specifically now, there's about 11,600 homeless people. And last year alone, the government placed 2,600 homeless people into new housing. So that 11,000 isn't even counting the 2,600 that they placed last year. And over the years, they've placed over 14,000 people into permanent supportive housing, which is housing that the government helps them pay for in order for them to not be homeless. And one of the other big statistics that I came across was that 42% of the homeless people in Washington, D.C. are chronically homeless, which means they've been homeless for over a year, or within the last 3 years, they've been in and out of homelessness. And the national average for that is only 23%, so Washington, D.C. almost doubles it. But luckily, within the last year, there's been a 22% decrease in the amount of unsheltered homeless people that are living in the district. So some descriptors of the homeless population across America: a lot of people that are homeless have substance abuse issues, whether it be alcohol or drugs. They either have become homeless due to their addictions and they have lost their families and friends and their jobs, or they become addicted to substances once they've reached homelessness. Poverty is a big one. As you would expect, a lot of people that are homeless live below the poverty line, and they either don't have a job or they just don't have enough money to pay to live somewhere. Mental illness is a big one too. There's a lot of people with psychosis and schizophrenia that are living on the streets, so they can't hold a job as well, and they just struggle to live their everyday lives. And lastly, veterans. There's a lot of veterans that are homeless, and like this sign says, 1 out of 4 homeless men have served our country or in the military. I think there isn't a specific number, but between 130,000 to 200,000 people are veterans is what has been reported on homeless people. And this also goes to the mental illness issue with veterans that come back from war with PTSD. Then they can no longer hold a new job, or if they're an amputee and they can no longer do manual labor, they struggle to find jobs and then end up on the streets. So this is another chart showing the veteran homeless population. This is from 2013 to 2014, but in DC, over that time frame, we had an 18% decrease in veteran homelessness, and it's since gone down. And then in New York City, they had a 45% decrease, which is huge because New York City has a very large homeless population, as well as North Dakota, Texas, and Arizona all dropping down, and Alaska dropped down almost 60%. I don't know how many homeless veterans resided in Alaska, but it's gone down 60%, so that's pretty good. Whereas other states like Nevada and New Mexico and Mississippi have gone up significant amounts in veteran homeless. But that can either be translated to the veterans have gotten jobs and they've gotten out of homelessness, or they've moved to Nevada because the weather's nice and they like it there. So going to the shelters in DC, I narrowed it down to Washington, DC, and then 15 miles around the city because I found out that there's a lot of homeless shelters. And so within Washington, DC specifically, there's 23 homeless shelters. And then in Arlington County, there's 12. And then in Prince George's County and Montgomery County, there's 24 total. And they offer all different types of amenities for the homeless population. So they offer things. I focused this aspect mainly to Washington, D.C. specifically, so those 23 homeless shelters. 17 of the 23 offer them a place to sleep at night, as well as meals, laundry facilities, medical clinics, clothing donations, places to check their email, and all sorts of things like that. And then there's 8 facilities that are just open during the day. And they offer resume building and job hunting resources, as well as more in-depth medical clinics that can help people get medications that don't have medical insurance. And within these shelters, they're also separated into who can go to the shelters. So within DC, there's 6 shelters that are available for women and children. There's 6 shelters available just for men. There's 8 shelters that are available for everyone. And then 2 shelters for families that families can all stay at together, and 1 shelter for the LGBT community. Because a lot of people around here that are gay or bisexual or transgender, they don't feel safe coming to the homeless shelters because people aren't always nice in the homeless shelters. And that's also another issue because a lot of people try to avoid homeless shelters because of stealing. And when you have so little, when you're homeless, you don't want to go somewhere to spend the night and potentially get your belongings stolen. And then during the winter, even more homeless shelters open up. So these are the permanent homeless shelters, but with the harsh winters, the emergency shelters in churches and gymnasiums will open up just for the night. So they don't offer meals or anything, but they give people a nice place to sleep so they don't get hypothermia. And this picture right here is a picture of the CCNV, which is the Center for Creative Nonviolence, located in Washington, D.C. And it's actually the largest homeless shelter in the country. And it has 1,500 beds, and they offer meals and all different types of resources for the homeless community. So that has really helped DC as an area get on their feet. So my recommendations to improve homelessness don't really start in the shelters. I think that a way to improve homelessness would be to help raise the minimum wage. A lot of people are on the poverty line that end up becoming homeless. They are struggling to make ends meet, and if something bad happens, like mom gets sent to the hospital and they have to pay those hospital bills, they might not be able to pay their rent, and then they become homeless for a short period of time. So if we can create more financial stability by raising the minimum wage, I think that would greatly help the homeless population. But within the shelters, I think that they lacked in resources for domestic violence. They have shelters where women and children can stay that are victims of domestic abuse, but they don't necessarily have that great of options to help them get out of the situation they're in because they can't stay in the shelter forever. They need to go home. And then I also believe that if the shelters had better case management, they would get more people out of homelessness. So if they had someone that followed people applying for jobs around and made sure that they got out of their substance abuse problems or their alcoholism, and they follow them to make sure they could get a job and hold their job, that less people would stay chronically homeless. And then lastly, if there was a safer environment in the homeless shelters, if they create more security, like providing lockers with locks that people can put their stuff in when they go to sleep at night, they will be more apt to come to the shelters because there would be less of a risk of losing their belongings. So these are my references, and that is what I did. Yes.
Question for you. Why do you think Washington, D.C. has such a high homelessness compared to other hospitals?
I think that because there is a large population of poverty within DC, and then also the large, from my research, how there being a black male predisposes you to becoming homeless, is what it said in the research. So I think due to the high population of both poverty and black males, and just people living along the poverty line, I think that helps bump up the amount of people that are homeless in the city. But with that being said, they do offer a lot of shelters in those areas. So in Columbia Heights in Washington, D.C., that's where 8 of the shelters are located. So they do have the shelters placed in areas where they do think need it most.
How about the opposite way? What do you think the factors are that lead to states like Mississippi and others having such low poverty?
I question that too. I think that because Mississippi has a lower cost of living, I think that helps lead to there being less homelessness down there. I know Washington, D.C. has a very high rate of living, so I think those two, they're opposites on the scale. I think that helps add to it.
Yeah, and I think that like Texas having very high homelessness and California, that makes sense because those are relatively warm climates. Going to
Yeah, I don't know. But what the research also showed was that in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New York City, and Delaware, those states, over 95% of the homeless people are in shelters. So they do have them all accounted for, and they are helping them. But I think.
Is it concentrated towards very large cities then too?
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
didn't have Chicago on there. I know.
Yeah, no, Chicago wasn't really an issue.
Yeah.
I think it's the larger cities, and I know New York City and Boston both have pretty high rates of living or cost of living. So it was very spread out. Hawaii had a pretty high rate too, but if I were homeless, I'd probably want to live in Hawaii. But I don't know how they get there, so I think Hawaii also has a high rate of living. Yeah. So I think it's one of those things where a lot of people aren't chronically homeless, but a lot of people become homeless for short periods of time, and it's due to not necessarily being able to pay your rent or just having other things to pay for. So, yep. I had a question too for the audience, if there's time. My question was, have any of you volunteered at a homeless shelter, and what was your experience volunteering? Yes.
I was there when the Community for Creative Nonviolence started the shelter.
Oh, okay. How did you like it?
It was a very political organization at first,
Mm-hmm.
centered around a charismatic leader, a very narcissistic charismatic leader. But what's interesting is that they moved, when he moved on, to providing these beds. That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and there's thousands. You know, what is it?
1,500. Yeah.
1,500. Yeah.
Yeah. I know the Creative Nonviolence Center that started off with Martin Luther King, I think, and it has since turned into more of a homeless shelter. It was more just a community center, but it has transformed into more of just a homeless shelter with places to sleep.